of tonight's forum, along with the Hilton precinct. We both have vested interest in organising this, apart from the fact that we really want to promote a conversation between candidates and the public. Our vested interest, Oxfam's vested interest, is climate change. We have formed a roundtable with unions, council of churches and environmental groups to try and get climate change on the agenda. So hint hint, someone please ask a question about climate change. And of course the Hilton precinct is campaigning all the time to improve the local area and is very aware of the issues in this local Hilton area, and I'm sure people will be asking lots of questions about those. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on Noongar land, proudly Noongar land, and we thank them for looking after it for generation upon generation. My job is to introduce the MC for this evening, Martin Drum from Notre Dame. He is a tireless campaigner for local grassroots democracy, was probably the chief organiser of the forum in Fremantle 2 nights ago, and has helped us on several occasions being an MC of other forums, and always does a great honest job, and I'd like to thank him for his commitment to local democracy in this way. So can you please introduce
Thanks. Well, it's great to be here tonight, and thanks for coming along on a Thursday evening to join us. I thought I'd just say some very few remarks about the seat of Willagee. On paper, apparently after its redistribution, it's a 15% margin, Labor versus Liberal. I imagine some of our candidates might have something to say about that, because unfortunately I don't have the Liberal candidate here today. The seat was created in 1996, and its first member was former ABC journalist Alan Carpenter. He went on to become Premier of Western Australia. After his retirement in 2009, he was won by Labor's Peter Tinley at a by-election. Mr Tinley secured 53% of the primary votes, and the final margin was 10.6% versus the Greens, in the absence of a Liberal candidate at that stage. So that's a very brief history. The seat covers Willagee, Samson, O'Connor, Hilton, Coolbellup, and parts of Hamilton Hill, Spearwood, Melville, Cardinia and Fibra Lake. So I imagine quite a few of you here this evening from one of those suburbs or nearby. I'd like to quickly introduce each of our candidates. Unfortunately, Alicia Ryans-Taylor, who's the Greens candidate, can't be with us tonight. She's with her father, who's very ill. So with the consent of all the other candidates, Lynn McLaren is representing the Greens here tonight. Lynn McLaren is a local representative, just in the upper house rather than the lower house. She's the MLC for the South Metropolitan region for the Greens. So she should be very familiar with all of our local issues as well as perhaps statewide issues as well. So thanks for coming along, Lynn. Sam Wainwright. Sam lives in O'Connor, and he works at the North Fremantle Container Wharf. His background is in campaigning for workers' rights and over social justice issues. Sam's focus has been on sustainability, public transport and cycling solutions. And he's been a councillor for the City of Fremantle since 2009. Thanks, Sam. Welcome. Yeah, you're welcome to give a hand they've given their time to come and join us. Teresa, Sam?
I thought you left the wharf.
That's true, I did months ago, but I didn't want to interrupt.
Oh, okay, well I've just got off his site, so I stand corrected there. Okay, need to check my facts. Teresa Van Linsart is standing as an independent for the seat of Willagee, but she is the director of the West Australian Party, which is not currently registered, so hence her status as independent tonight. Her main policy focus is on education, and I imagine she'll be talking a fair bit about that particular issue. She's the director of the Expert Education Services, which is her consultancy firm. I understand. So welcome Teresa, and Teresa's quite an experienced candidate. She stood in the federal seat of Swan and in the upper house in 2005, South Metro, and then Victoria Park in the lower house. So she has a fair bit of experience as a candidate. And second last, Wayne Shortland. Wayne, I've only met you this evening. Wayne has 3 kids. He was born and bred in this area. He's born in East Fremantle, attended Coolbellup Primary School and South Fremantle High School. It's a bit of a local pedigree. One of the issues that he stated he's going to be campaigning on is the 100% green power scheme, and he has serious concerns over the way that scheme's run. And last but not least, the Labor candidate is Peter Tinley. He's the sitting member. Peter was born in Perth and attended John Curtin Senior High School. He's served with the SAS regiment. He's been awarded an MOA for his service in 2003 in the Army, and he ran a small business before being elected in 2009, and he was in the Shadow Cabinet in 2012 as the Shadow Minister for Planning, Housing and Local Jobs. So welcome to Peter to our discussion. So hopefully you've got a bit of an understanding of each of our candidates this evening. Without further ado, I do have some prepared questions which have been sent to me, but we're going to mix them up with some of the questions from the floor this evening. And perhaps we'd like to start with, before we start with our questions, with a 2-minute address by each of our candidates, really trying to focus on what they offer you as a candidate and perhaps some reasons for voting for them. I think we might just go from left to right and start with Teresa. Thanks, Teresa.
Many thanks to the organisers of our forum. I've prepared something for you because you deserve it. Many thanks to the organisers of our forum, and special thanks to you for your attendance. I'm Teresa Van Lieshout, independent for Willagee. My parents are Dutch. They met in WA in the 1950s, married in Hilton. My 8 brothers and sisters and I are all born in WA. My mother's family has a history in our electorate since the 1950s. I live in Hilton. I'm 41. As an experienced teacher I'm an experienced teacher with a Bachelor of Arts in Education, specialising in health and physical education and social science. A Bachelor of Education, a Master of Education, specialising in leadership management, 17 years teaching experience in secondary and primary education. I've also written 4 books of non-fiction literature, published with the National Library of Australia. I have an educational service registered with the Department of Commerce. My views on education, the economy, housing issues, ratepayers' rights, cost of living, homelessness and other issues are shared through our YouTube channel, West Oz Party. A print copy of my vision to fix our education system is available for you. It's out there for you. I have the best vision for education for our state and nation of any political candidate in this election. When I win this seat, I'll be pushing to become the next Minister for Education in WA. Every one of the 59 politicians in our lower house are responsible for and accountable for destroying our education system, for the violence and hardship pervading our society. Last year, less than 20% of WA children passed stage 2 English. 1 in 5 assaults in our northern suburbs are children assaulting parents. The economic management of our state and nation is appalling. A $19 billion state debt funded by record levels of lending from foreign banks, foreign investment and selling our crown and agricultural land. 105,000 homeless Australians across the country, 2 decades of unaccounted for suicide and 50 years of death by politicians and psychiatrists with dangerous practices. I will pursue a Royal Commission for Justice. We hear of sports stadiums, foreshore developments and rich corporate interests, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. The culmination of selfish, greedy, corrupt and failed leadership from current and past politicians. In partnership with you, I seek to pursue a better vision for our society. I'm not interested in politics and power, I'm interested in effective leadership. Great leaders selflessly sacrifice and serve society. They strive to maintain their integrity. They have genuine care and concern for their people. They understand and practice the concept of accountability. They strive for a better vision of goodwill and seek to empower, encourage and edify the citizen. My commitment is to fight for your rights and freedoms as constituents, your interests, your priorities, your goals and your dreams. I seek to develop your gifts and talents, to honour your work and your efforts, to help you resolve your issues. I will fight for the right of all Australian citizens to freedom and justice, the right to safety in the community, the right to a job, the right to a home and the right to a good education. Together we can build a better community, a better electorate, a better society. Together our electorate can provide true leadership to our state and eventually our nation. Thank you.
I'm now going to ask Sam Wainwright for his opportunity.
Thank you very much to Mark, the panellist, and everyone here today. Just to pick up on this point, I've worked down at the container wharf for 12 years, and 18 months ago, life changed, and instead of moving containers, I'm a disability support worker. I think a good starting point for analysis of this state election should be to take up an important issue which basically doesn't feature, and that is to stop the urgent need to stop and reverse what I regard as the fundamentally and thoroughly anti-social cuts to social services that have been implemented by the Barnett government. Which means, for instance, and by one way of example, that 30 social trainers who work with adults with disability in the community have been cut by this government. And that's just one slice, one example of the consequences of these cuts. 2% in the first year, 1% every year thereafter, that'll be 6.5% by 2015-16. In similar vein, we need to halt and reverse the privatisation of our hospitals. To me, it is utterly inconceivable that public money can be given to a private operator who then turns around and says, we're not going to perform termination or vasectomies in a hospital that is funded by us. That is fundamentally immoral, unjust, and should not be allowed to happen. I would certainly call on the incoming Labor government to reverse that. We also need a renewed focus on justice for women. We always get in state elections, particularly coming from the Conservative side, a big beat up about law and order. But the single biggest form of violence and assault happening in our communities every day is family and domestic violence. Our Warrawee Women's Refuge, not far from here, only has 13 beds. Every single night they turn away over 200 people. And that's the same for every single refuge across Greater Perth. I mean, it utterly shames all of us to allow something like that to persist. And that has never been the topic of a law and order debate. We're further campaigning on the need to cut freeway expenditure in order to fund public transport and to get more freight on the rail. And in that context, we absolutely welcome the Metronet proposal and the Greens light rail proposals. And to that end, we will campaign both in the election and post-election against any widening of Stock Road or High Street to a 6-lane road. You only increase the capacity of a road by 50% if you want to increase the traffic, the road accident trauma, the diesel particulate pollution and the greenhouse gases by 50%. I don't, because I know there's a better way that moving people and freight can be achieved. We also really need to address the housing affordability crisis wrapped in Western Australia. And we have to start at the sharp end, and that means increasing funding for social housing, both public housing and the cooperative tenant directive social housing. We need to recreate a genuine third sector of housing in Australian society, like it used to be. Public housing has diminished over the decades. It has been turned into welfare housing. It never used to be like that. It used to be a legitimate third stream of housing, just like private rent or private ownership. And it needs to be so again. It's only a significant investment in social housing that will put downward pressure on property prices. We also need to stop feather bedding fossil fuel companies and move to 100% renewable energy within 10 years. It can be done. It's been demonstrated by the Beyond Zero Emissions team based at Melbourne University. And a good place to start for us in Fremantle would be to come behind the Fremantle Community Wind Farm project. And that's an appropriate point for me to really deplore what I believe is the disingenuous and dishonest obstruction of that project by the Fremantle Port Authority. I'm sure with backing of the Barnett government. I mean, what are these people afraid of? They're afraid of the threat of a good example. Or that the symbolic value that I see in having a successful green energy project happening at North Quay, that is precisely what they don't want people to see. And it adds fuel to my view that there should be elected community and workplace representatives on the board of the Fremantle Port Authority. Not just fossil fuel company executives, Woodside executives and other corporate executives appointed by Colin Barnett for Baltimore. But most of all, throughout this election campaign, the theme that we're hammering away on again and again is the fact that we need to share the wealth. We're living in a so-called boom, but the most disadvantaged are worse off as a consequence of the boom. If you're on a low fixed income, the boom is a disaster for you, these rising house prices. We need to share the wealth. More than that, we need to redistribute the wealth, and it's why Socialist Alliance, we've been raising again and again the fact that we advocate progressively bringing the mining and resource sector into public ownership. And we're stone cold sober about the fact that that seems pie in the sky and from another planet in the context of today's Western Australian politics. And I think it's a sign of just how much big mining companies don't just dominate our economy, dominate our politics, they dominate our imagination. You know, it's worth reflecting that 60 years ago, it was a Labor Prime Minister advocating bringing the banking sector in its entirety into public ownership. And we advocated, not just because it's some abstract principle for us, but because to create and harness the resources, to create the socially just future that we need, to create the social spending that we need, and also to create the renewable energy future we need, you have to be able to bring those resources and strategic sectors of the economy like that into public ownership. If you don't do it, you just will not be able to create that socially just future and that green future, which I know I aspire to.
Thank you, Sam. I might ask Linda if you want to say a few words about what the Greens will be running on in Willagee, or are running on already.
Sure, thank you very much, and I do appreciate the opportunity. I want to thank Oxfam for holding it, and also Dean Martin for keeping us in order. I am running in the election, and I'm running in the election from Victoria Park down to Singleton, so I cover this entire region, and I've represented you in Willagee for the last 4 years. In my capacity as spokesperson for 13 different portfolio areas, it includes planning and housing, which makes me the deep shadow to Peter's shadow. So far in this election, I just want to talk about a few of our policies that we've released. This one is Energy 2029. This is a plan to bring Western Australia into 100% renewables by the year 2029. It's costed. We describe exactly how you do it, and there are three different ways, three different scenarios we could go forward. One of those scenarios is a mix of energy, as Sam has pointed out, which would include some wind, some geothermal, and a lot of solar. I really do encourage you, no matter how you're going to vote in this election, have a look at this energy plan, and the chances are that whoever's elected, they're going to be taking this up once they get into government. Secondly, the bike vision, which came out a little bit before the election. This is one of the integrated, cost-effective strategies we have for addressing congestion. Because you can't just solve congestion by one method, and if we wait for MetroNet to be built, we're going to suffer more congestion for years to come before the heavy rail is put in. So what we've said is we can become a world-class bicycling city and have light rail linking our heavy rail systems in place cheaper and more rapidly than MetroNet. We do applaud the Labour Party's MetroNet proposal, but what we're saying is we can get a lot more clever about answering that congestion problem quicker. One of the other things I've introduced is solar panels on social housing. This would deliver a greenhouse gas emission savings of 75,000 tons a year into the pocket of someone who's living in social housing, $500 a year. And for us, it just comes at $68 million to be able to deliver solar panels on 30,000 roofs for public and social housing. This was something I announced in the very first week of the election. You haven't heard about it because for some reason the media is only covering the two majors. Today, Bill Johnston released something that was very similar. So the ALP is picking up these ideas as we release them and making the best of them. And I can say, I don't really mind that. We don't mind being the brains trust for the ALP. But if that's our role, we need to be in Parliament to do that. So we're asking you to support us once again. And Alicia, if she were here, you'd be very impressed by how articulate she is. She's a 12-year resident at community housing here in Willagee, And I do hope that you have an opportunity to meet her. She's an outstanding candidate, and you would be proud to be represented by her in the lower house.
I might ask Wayne to have his say and deliver his pitch for your vote.
Half-heartedly, they'll put an extra lane down the freeway, only to have a clog at the end because they didn't do the job properly. You know what I mean? I mean, we've still got 2 lanes that go through the city on the freeway. There's only 2 lanes that you can get through the city. I mean, all these things should have been fixed 20 years ago. Both major parties have had a good 20 years to plan for the last boom, and they did nothing really. They just frittered around the edges. I'm sure in the next 20 years there'll be a few more booms, and the way we're going to lose a lot of the best opportunities in that because of all these inefficiencies that are still in the system that aren't being addressed properly. I estimate sure that we probably need $41 billion of infrastructure now to fix up all these things. You know, we needed MetroNet 20 years ago. 25 years ago, they were ripping up train tracks that went across Stock Road down in Spearwood there. Do you know what I mean? And it was the Liberal Party who shut down the Fremantle Railway from Fremantle to the city. That their policies haven't really changed. They're still stuck in the same loops. And if they still keep the majority, whether it's Liberal or Labor, the same things are going to be happening again. They're going to do, they're going to come up with a broad idea a day before an election to promise this or that. Oh, you're going to get a train station if you vote us in. The government should be doing this anyway. There shouldn't be a crux point where it's either my way or it's going to be totally off in another direction. We need to plan properly. We need to get all the government departments organised so that if a mining company in some area, you know what I mean, is planning a big project 10 years out, the government's got 10 years to do something about it. But they don't do anything about it. They don't.
God's calling.
They don't.
It's a buzzer for
This is how manual override. Manual override fixes any computer. You know what I mean? There's a story in the paper. It costs like $45 for a steak burger in a town because all the local governments haven't planned properly to release enough land so people can have enough effectively cheap housing so that their employees aren't squeezed out. And it's just getting worse, and people are frustrated, and small towns are collapsing. They're going back to the city, and it's just destroying the whole state because all that's left is all that you're going to be able to afford is visa 457 workers to come and work into these towns because the person who's charging $10 for the coke is the only person who can afford to pay a visa 457 worker and because no one else can afford it. Now, I've probably had my 2.5 minutes already.
Yeah, I think
but,
so. So wind it up, thanks, Wayne.
But yeah, I mean, and all these things like the solar power rebate and all these kinds of things, the way all these people have been effectively screwed over. They'd have a business plan to pay off solar panels in 10 years. I mean, the government comes in and just destroys all those kinds of things. We've got to get back to effective planning, and all the parties have got to give up a few things and really get in and get some stuff done for WA.
Thanks, Peter. In particular, Lynn argues that the Greens are the brains trust for the ALP. Maybe you can, in your statement, respond to that.
Maybe I could. Maybe I
You don't
would.
have to.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark, for that segue. Look, it's a pleasure to be here, and I really do relish the opportunity. I do want to thank Oxfam and the Hilton Precinct Group for doing it. Not every seat gets this. Not every seat it gets it, and every seat should get it. And Narelle and your crew have done a great job to actually push them. everybody in this room is already set. Your vote's set, isn't it? You know which way you're going. There's not a vote to be won in this hall. That's fine. That doesn't mean for a second that this is invalidated. That doesn't for a second mean that you ought not to have the right to hear each and every one of us outlay what we think has happened in the last 4 years and what we think ought to happen in the next 4 years, and I hope beyond. What was interesting last night at Fremantle, we had the candidates all speaking, and they're all classic Fremantle, they're all circulating around localised issues, which are absolutely important. And what we've already heard here, not one person talking about Willagee, Hilton, Coolbellup, Hammy Hill, and the actual lived space of Willagee. And that's great, because we get to dance on a big stage called Western Australia and its place in the Indian Ocean. I relish the opportunity to talk about that in a vision, but I also understand as the incumbent member that I have to stand accountable to you for what I have done in my 3 years, because I came in a by-election, and what I have actually done for the seat, and in the second part, what I would actually want to hope to do in the seat, and more importantly as we go question by question, perhaps not in my first spiel, the opportunities that I see, the great opportunities I see for us in Western Australia. So I've been the member for 3 years. It was a great surprise at 50 years of age now that I could get such enjoyment from a job. Such enjoyment. 25 years in the army and a few years in small business, starting up and operating my own businesses. I actually think now that those experiences were preparation in order for me to do what I finally found I wanted to do when I grow up, which is be a member of Parliament. It is a truly great privilege. And I'll give you one story. The month after I got elected, walked into that horrible little dog box of an office, and we were sorting ourselves out, and this older lady came in, I don't know, maybe mid-60s, Italian, English was a second language, but it wasn't distant. But she was a widow, and she came to us with a $1,000 water bill. She came in the door, and she had this $1,000 water bill. And I said, how can we help? And she said, I don't know what to do. And we said, oh, okay. And I had a lovely lady who had a lot of experience, Sue Hearn, she doesn't work, she's retired now. She grabbed it and rang the water board, or the water board to sort it out. But you and I, most of us are we're all well-informed and educated people. You'd spend the 20 minutes on the phone, you know something's gone wrong. But right there in that moment, that woman was so dispossessed from her society. She sees government and government departments as this monolithic, impenetrable block. Well, within 10 minutes, Sue had it sorted out that email, the new bill at $100 and something. A weight had been lifted off those shoulders. So that's an experience that I will always carry with me as being one that is so important to understand it's the needs of those people that I have to service. I have to serve, and there's been countless examples of that coming through my door and finding as I go through. We've delivered a number of significant small things around, I say significant small because they're small by, you won't read about them in the West, but they do happen. And the Herald, God bless them, they cover everything that gets done. And no, I do mean that, and I think all of us would speak that. The Herald, we're very lucky to have a paper like the Herald because they're not frightened to actually run controversial issues. And you won't get that out of some of the other newspapers. Was that a good sucker? I actually didn't mean it. So my point is, we've delivered footpaths down on Joanna Street. We've helped the Port School acquire a Department of Housing. So Port School, if you don't know it, actually looks after only 50 of the most damaged kids in our secondary education system. Gets them back on track. They do intensive work down in a converted squash court. We got them the house next door from the Department of Housing, so they can actually look after teen mums and they've got a creche and they can continue on with their education. So there's a couple of examples, and I won't go much further because we're going to run out of time. There is a whole bunch of stuff that has been done. I'm more than happy to go line by line on it. It's been a great privilege to serve as the member for the last 3 years. I absolutely love the job. I completely and wholly want the job for another 4 years. I am going out there all day, every day to make sure I get that opportunity. Thanks.
Well, thanks for coming along. And on the James Price point, gas hub.
Glad we've gone to the really easy questions first. Labour, do you mind if we sit? Do you want us to stand?
No. I'm happy with this.
Yeah, thanks. Look, the Labor's Party position was and we've been on our feet in Parliament about this, is that the government has absolutely circumvented the process that we put in place. One of the things we know about Indigenous culture is that arriving at a decision, arriving at a consensus takes a long period of time. Eric Ripper understood that, and they were prepared to take as long as it took to get that position. Are we opposed to the James Price point now in more black and white? The answer is we don't know. The answer is we are generally in favour of development in the Kimberleys. But here's the point, here's the rider. If you want to look at what not to do in the Kimberleys, look at the Pilbara. You look at the way we developed the Pilbara, pell-mell in a time when these mining companies and the entrepreneurial spirit of Western Australia rode premier over it all, is an example of what not to do. So the wider question isn't James Price Point. The wider question is, what do we want for the Kimberleys? Because we've got Lake Argyle. What do we think about aquaculture in Lake Argyle? What do we think about a 100,000 person city on the shores of Lake Argyle? I'm just throwing that point out there. So there is more to this than just the discussion around James Price Point, which is not invalid, it's absolutely essential to have. So my personal view and the party's view is that we would restart the consultation process that's been stalled and circumvented by this government.
Okay, perhaps we'll have, does anyone want to respond to that? I think we know where the Greens stand on this, Lynn, but really briefly.
I think everyone knows that the Greens are entirely opposed to the industrialisation of the Kimberley and James Price. We also, I personally, have listened to John Ford, who is the spokesman for the AOP in the upper house, and he is not as soft as Peter Tinley is right now. The AOP has not opposed James Price Point in the Parliament, and I welcome you to look at the Parliament record to actually test what is being said now against their parliamentary record. Now, obviously, we would welcome it if the AOP opened it up again for debate. But for the Greens, the debate is over, and James Price Point is the wrong place to put a gas hub.
Just before I let Sam briefly comment on this, actually turn off your mobile phones. We've got a couple of incidents already, so if your phone's still on, click the switch. Sam.
Yeah, in fact, when I was in the Maritime Union, the phone went off during a stop work meeting. You owed everyone a round of fun afterwards. Look, likewise, we're opposed to putting the gas processing plant on James Price Point. Either at the Pilbara or an offshore facility is a better way to go. I think there's two other questions that need to be brought into the discussion as well that go beyond that. One is the fact that remote Aboriginal communities shouldn't have to sell off access to their land in order to qualify the development and not just access to jobs and civic facilities that people in the city take for granted. So people in the Kimberley shouldn't be cut out of the development wealth that flows just because the processing plant is not on the Kimberley. And that sort of brings us back to the question, the point I tried to raise at the end of my presentation, is that we actually need greater democratic community control over the flow of the wealth that flows from this thing, so we can make those kind of decisions. The second thing too is we have to begin a discussion about when we actually stop the exploitation of oil and gas in the northwest. If we're serious about stopping runaway global warming, that means that developed countries need to cut their greenhouse emissions by 2020 by 40 to 60%. That was as of 3 years ago. Ghana was at the lower end of the spectrum, 40%. Other climate scientists say 60%. So at a certain point, we have to breach this discussion in Australia. We cannot continue selling coal and gas to the world forever. Otherwise, we'll destroy the world. And that's a taboo topic in Australia. It's like, I mean, you can't talk about serious actions to stop climate change, our own emissions themselves. But God forbid you actually dare to talk about pumping our fossil fuels into the rest of the world forever. I mean, we have to have a discussion about tapering it down and turning it off.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for giving us your perspective. Perhaps we can get Teresa and Wayne on the next one. Yes.
John Kernai is my name here. Are you allowed one question, or can you pose a series of
ask us a
questions?
question, and we've got a fairly small audience tonight, so every chance to get another one.
All right, no worries. Well, look, let's see how far I can go with it.
Was that your 2 questions?
No. Okay, first question.
That's your response.
It's for the panel. Council amalgamations. I'd just like to get everyone's opinion on council amalgamations, pros and cons, just quickly on that. And one question directed to Peter Tinley, if I may. Just going back to what you said about everyone's made up their mind when they come here, etc., etc. I happened to fall into the seat of Willagee because they redrew the boundaries back up again. Prior to that, I was with Francis Logan, whom I've shared some intimate times without going into the details. Sewage campaigns.
There's a lot of sewage in there.
Hence, I've come here tonight mainly because I'm looking at a potential state leader, because that's the word on the street. Having said that, I'd like to ask you a direct question, without, if you can be honest without telling party lines. What's your take on climate change? What's your personal take on it? Is it real? Are you a skeptic? Or do you lean towards the Abbott theory? Or maybe the Abbott theory is a bit of a bow to draw here, but what's your gut feeling? Is that okay?
Yep, no worries. Why don't we start with council amalgamations? That came first. So, Teresa, use your opportunity.
Okay, first of all, as an independent in the Parliament, I'll get to vote on every decision and bill independently of any party, and so therefore my priority is to reflect your views and your voice. In regards to council amalgamations, I'm against council amalgamations, and I have outlined a vision for local government reform in Western Australia on our YouTube to repeal the Local Government Act in Western Australia of 1995 and replace it with a Ratepayers Association Act, because I believe there's too much corruption in our local government. There's investing money in the corporate sector. They're paying executives in excess of $250,000. They're getting too much money, and that money's not being spent on the community. So what I want is a Ratepayers Association Act established and scrap the Local Government Act. So each suburb have a Ratepayers Association Act, the Ratepayers Association under an act, where the rights, needs and interests of ratepayers is central to the legislation. So the funding goes to the Ratepayers Association for each suburb in Western Australia, and they spend that funding on the community. Because at the moment, too much funding in local government is not going to the community, and they are wasting it, and they are using ratepayers' money against homeowners, prosecuting them in the magistrates' court. It's absolutely disgusting. And the use of local government money is being directed towards commercial centres, and it's not being used on the community. So there's too much corruption there. They spent $100 million, Melbourne City Council, I want a parliamentary investigation into Melbourne City Council, $100 million of ratepayers' money invested in the US housing market, and they lost it. And that's corruption. So I'm against council amalgamations, and I'm in favour of the scrapping of the Local Government Act and setting up of a Ratepayers Association Act for each suburb. They control the funding, and that Ratepayers Association spends the money on the community.
Thanks, that's a very clear position there from Teresa. We might hear from a local government councillor in Sam Wainwright.
Yeah, look, for those that aren't aware, the Barney government has been for some time that it's keen to go from the approximate 30 local governments that we have over the Greater Perth metropolitan area to 15 to 20. And they appointed a committee to make recommendations in that regard, which have drawn some initial lines on a map. But I think the Barney government's been a bit sneaky in that they've telegraphed very strongly the direction they want to go without expressly saying so before the state election, so that it doesn't become a big issue and a controversial issue. But prepared to strike fast and hard immediately after the state election. And I think that's unfair and undemocratic. They should be upfront and honest with what their position is right here and now. I've got a position that the boundaries of our local governments are always going to be arbitrary. There's no, I'm not in principle in favour or against local government amalgamation as such. I think there is a case for the creation of a greater Fremantle Council, which takes in some of Fremantle's, what I would call real kind of natural hinterland. But what I do think is important is that it be voluntary and it be put to ratepayers and residents to vote upon. My fear is that's not the kind of process that Barnett is going to give us if he gets back in.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Greens policy, maybe.
Oh, well, the Greens policy, again in this area, is quite clear. We are opposed to forced local government amalgamations. We do see that there may be cases where local governments might want to amalgamate, but it should be down to the ratepayers in those areas to determine that efficiencies can be gained by, for example, a greater Fremantle Council. So the way that this government is going about local government amalgamations is completely opposed by the Greens. We do support local governments, and we think that local government as a grassroots decision, the lowest level of decision making, should actually be better resourced and have better training and more empowerment. In fact, we go so far as to say that local government should be recognized in the federal constitution, which would instigate some more empowerment and also accountability. So that's the direction the Greens would like to see us go in. And you can see that the current government, and in fact, and we may find out soon that the ALP is very similar, that amalgamations seem to be a foregone conclusion, that it's got to happen. Well, what we saw in the last election, I'll wrap up now, in the election in the Northern Territory was that there was a backlash against forced amalgamations, and nearly the entire government was turned around, flipped around. So why the Colin Barnett government would continue down the road that other governments have done in forcing amalgamations, which were completely unpopular, and you found that subsequent governments, as they were elected, undid that work. We don't have time or resources to do that. We know we've got other big problems to deal with, and this shouldn't really be happening. And you're exactly right. I'd say Sam Wainwright's hit the nail on the head by saying that the fact that the Liberal government hasn't shown its hand, hasn't said, this is exactly what we're going to do, and this is when we're going to do it, is incredibly irresponsible, we feel, of a government that should be showing more leadership and more transparency.
Thanks for that. Lynn, why don't you have a view about whether your local government should disappear or amalgamate or so to say?
Yeah, I've got lots of ideas, but I think Barnett, if he was, he will do it if he gets in, because that's what the Liberals do. They've given you a hint of what they can do, and then if he gets some power, he's just going to do it. He's not going to care. He's arrogant about everything. He's just going to do whatever he wants when he can. Now, if he was really into this issue, I think he should have made his local council of Cottesloe amalgamate with, say, Peppermint Grove or something like that to have a trial. Do you know what I mean? But he would rather just put these issues onto other people, and then maybe that takes a bit of the energy away from the pressure in his local area. You know what I mean? Because you have a good idea, you have a trial, you see how it works, you find out what goes wrong, you have a chat about it, you go, well, is this really where we want to go? Now, they haven't done that. Sure, you can pay some consultants to have their opinion, but it's not a real opinion of the way everyone feels, I don't think. All it would do would be like in Queensland, in Brisbane, they have Brisbane City Council, which takes up pretty much the whole metropolitan area, and all that happens is services don't go to the local area where they're needed. They just go to, we'd like to tidy up this place over here. We got tidied up a few years ago, let's just tidy it up again. And then all these other little pockets just get left behind and left behind. I don't really think it's what Perth needs. Perth needs councils to be accountable, governments to get on and do what they're supposed to be doing, and not just building monuments and leaving all these. It should be more focused on making sure that Fremantle Hospital, for an example, can have the best chance.
I think we're getting a bit off topic off the council evaluations.
But Barnett's attitude is to make up something to distract everybody from the real issues. And it's an issue with these local council amalgamations. In 3 months' time, he'll make up something else. Do you know what I mean? And it's all a distraction from what the government should really be doing, and we have to change that.
Maybe we'll hear from Peter.
Really quickly,
Labor has a policy.
we're completely opposed to forced amalgamations, and there's a whole bunch of other parts about that policy, but the current situation, and we don't endorse everything from the Robson Review. One thing we certainly don't endorse from the Robson Review is the way they've seemingly arbitrarily laid down the boundaries. It is not good enough to talk about local government reform and just immediately go to the rate base and the size of the council and where the boundaries should be. That is such a facile attempt at trying to come up with reform. You need to have a reform from an internal perspective. For example, we could leave the boundaries exactly the way they are, leave the council exactly the way they are, and do a whole lot more about how we deliver HAC, for example, and reforming the delivery of services such as HAC, reforming the delivery of services such as social housing. Who said that it was the best way to manage 37,000 dwellings in Western Australia by the Department of Housing centrally, $7 billion of asset, and people in this suburb can tell you house by house how long they've been empty and unused, and it's an average of a year for a local house to get back into the game once it goes through its renovation. There's a whole lot more to talk about with local government than there is just simply to talk about boundaries. And the other thing we need to be careful with, this is one of the things I've learnt in my time in Parliament, there's always those boring little bits of detail that give you the unintended consequences. And the best example I can show you is point to is Brisbane. You have a mayor in Brisbane who is a professionalised politician, no problem with that, but you bring in party politics at the local level. And listening to independents here talking about how they can vote on their own or in the representation of their own people, you will lose that at local government if we politicise it, because they'll have to caucus and come up with party lines, and that's out of order.
Okay, we'll get you to respond really quickly so we can get on to some more questions. John did ask you directly, do you or don't you support the idea that
I completely 100% believe that climate change is real, it is man-made, and only humankind can actually redress the problem. Plain and simple. There's a bunch of conversation.
We'll get another question. Does Labor itself think that, besides you?
We're not.
All right, we'll just go down here and get another question.
Yeah. Peter, something you just inferred there really worries me. You posed the question, whoever said it was the best thing for Department of Housing centrally to manage social housing. Does that, I work for the public sector.
Sure.
I work in disability services. I've seen Barnett erode and cut and slash and completely sort of dissipate the work that those of us who work in the public service are attempting to do. It's had devastating consequences in disability services. It's had devastating consequences in housing. It's had devastating consequences in education and across the sector in mental health. We're always hearing in the Herald about people who who have died as a result of services not being adequately allocated to that arena. So my question is, I guess I want to hear from the candidates. I want to know that we're not going to see a continuing erosion of public sector with a view to outsourcing and privatising whole sections. I think we should be strengthening the public sector, and I'd like to hear how other people think these services should be delivered.
So the question's on privatisation. We won't start down either end this time. Perhaps Sam, I think you are pretty clear if you want privatisation, you can kick us off.
Yeah, look, the Barnett government, very soon after it came into power, the purpose of the reform was always to cut their overall expenditure on this sector, knowing full well that workers in the not-for-profit sector typically get paid 20-25% less than public servants doing the same job. So it was, I now work for a not-for-profit for a community sector organisation. So I want those organisations to get more money, and I value the work that people in that sector do. But what I cannot abide is governments who champion and pretend to be the great friend of charities and not-for-profit sector as cover for privatising out service delivery and for cutting wages. So, you know, public servants who are doing a job are being told if the work that you do gets contracted out to a not-for-profit service provider, there isn't an alternative job for you in the public sector. You're going to have to follow your job there, and when the time comes for your wages to be cut by 20% or 25%, you just don't have to like or want that. And a really good example is one I mentioned before, is community social trainers. So these, you know, there's a body of 30 of these people, highly experienced at helping adults with intellectual disabilities live independently in the community. And they were employed by the Disability Services Commission. And as a consequence of these grinding cutbacks, now the Disability Services Commission said, we're not going to provide that service anymore. That's going to be contracted out. So of course, those experienced workers, someone with 10, 20 years in that field, you know, they're not going to, you think they're going to take a 25% pay cut to do the job they used to do as public servants for uniting church or something like that? Of course they're not going to do it. No? So it's cutting and it's disruptive, and it's social vandalism, pure and simple, you know. And sorry to throw in another example, because this is what that I'm especially passionate about, is, you know, they, as I said, they've got big song and dance. We're going to give this extra 25% funding over 3 years, I think it was 4 years, to not-for-profit service providers. Now, one of those service providers happens to be the City of Fremantle. As Ken here well knows, the City of Fremantle runs under contract to the state government the Willagee Women's Refuge, under exactly the same contract conditions as every other refuge in women's refuge in Greater Perth. It's only 2 refuges that happen just by accident of history to be run by local governments. One is Willagee and one's up in Joondalup. And the state government has just arbitrarily said, we're not going to get the 25% funding increase for our refuge. And it's taken us 2 years to get a straight answer from the Minister, Helen Ward, as to why is that the case. We've got the Mayor to write to it, no response. Got him to write again, no response. I passed a motion at the southwest zone of Willagee, WA Local Government Association, to get a response. Finding 2 years to get a response from Minister Morton, oh, it's because you've got other ways of raising money. Meaning we can take it out of other Fremantle funds.
Thanks, Sam.
So that's very clear on this issue.
I
know you've got a lot to say on that. I just want to get around to give everyone a go.
Sure. Can I throw the question over to Peter? That I would very much like to see an incoming Labor government commit to fund that refuge on equal terms to the other.
First we'll stick with the audience's question in the first instance. If he wants to commit or not commit
if he wants
to Willagee refuge, that's fine. But Peter, in the first instance, you were asked about privatisation of government services.
Okay, this is, and I'll be quite open with you, and this is a dilemma for the Labor Party. And I don't run away and say that I'm trying. Please hear me out. There is, despite what Lynn might say about where our ideas come from, there is a great internal discussion going on about the word privatisation. There is a great internal discussion with a great deal of respect about, so we don't lose any of the best bits of any side of the argument, about what is privatisation. We are fundamentally, though, forming an opinion about a fundamental opposition to privatisation of delivery of human services. When you insert a profit motive in the chain of delivering human services, you cannot, in our opinion, do anything but diminish the quality of that service. And I'll give you the example of a good example and a bad example. The good example gone wrong. A bad example is Fiona Stanley. Fiona Stanley is going to be privatised. The people who are delivering care in some of the most difficult circumstances are going to be driven by a company that has to report quarterly about how much more profit it grew. That doesn't work. Where we are defining it is you privatise, if you want to, at all, and this is where the discussion, privatisation at things, not people. If you want to talk about privatisation of infrastructure or include of private capital to improve or deliver infrastructure, different discussion. But the delivery of human services is out of bounds. Now, just one last thing though, was the discussion about, as Sam raised, around disparity of wages. $600 million announcement. Barnett got sick of him just getting up and banging that into us all the time. I've got to have a shot at some of the NGOs myself. When we're in government, I understand the bar is always higher for the left of centre reform group for the Labor Party. We always get a fair shellacking. Our absolute best is the bare minimum requirement when it comes to these sorts of social justice issues. However, when Barnett put $600 million out there, he was very quick to dismiss the idea that we put to him that he had to do that anyway because there was a centralised wage case that would have to be factored into the delivery of that cost anyway, of that month. So it was eroded right out of the gate on the 15% wage increase. The reason the public sector is paid 20% or whatever, a larger amount than the equivalent not-for-profit, why? Because they're organised. And they're organised by trade unions. Trade unions still have a valid voice and place in this state, in this country, so that the collective bargaining capacity of workers is never ignored. The NGOs need to do the same thing. If there's not equal pay in NGOs, then the NGOs need to go out. I need to hear Wacos get out there and bang on how the evil, mean and nasty Barnett government is pulling the wool over people's eyes, because they did it when we were in government, they didn't miss us, and they seem to have all gone to ground because they're frightened that a mean and nasty Liberal government will in fact rip the funding right out of them. That's what they do, they play bad.
Okay, Wacos isn't here tonight, but Teresa is, and maybe you've got a different view, I don't know. Teresa, what about privatisation?
Yeah, a little bit. The funding of human services like education, health and disability services, the problem with the current politicians, including Labor, is that they don't know how to manage the economy. The problem with the current politicians is the management of the economy, and the funding of human services is not going to where it needs to go because they're now spending half political funding, at least in Western Australia, giving it to foreign companies. So Colin Barnett will give $4.3 billion to Serco to fund the Fiona Stanley Hospital, and 20% of that will go in profits. That's a foreign company. And none of the Labor politicians in the Parliament have objected to that. None of the Labor politicians have said, why are you giving $4.3 billion to Serco and you should be giving it to West Australian companies and organisations and businesses? So they say one thing in the Parliament and they'll say another thing to you. And they lie and they lie and they lie. And my vision is for 100% political funding in Western Australia and across the country to go to Western Australian businesses, organisations and services, and for none of it to go offshore. So they think it's cheaper to do it that way, but it's not, because the profits go and so do the jobs. The jobs are here. So there's an issue, that's the issue. The other issue is the management of the economy. They are borrowing record levels of foreign money from foreign banks and selling Crown land to fund their public expenditure, and it doesn't work. What my vision for the economy is to take control of Bank West and create a parliamentary division of the bank to fund public expenditure in education, health, disability services, industrial development, community projects, etc. That's very easy to do that. I worked in a bank before I became a teacher. They have no vision for the economy. Labor, Liberal, doesn't matter. And they've proven that they're going towards globalisation, which means they'll give all of our money away, and it's not being spent on the people.
Thanks, Teresa.
Okay,
Thanks for that. We might just, do you want a quick word, Wayne?
Yep.
Just give a quick word, thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Linda, of course.
The privatisation of services, as we've heard, just creates profit which doesn't go into the actual services. So you might lose a good clinician for whatever because he's not getting paid or he doesn't have the support services and he's under pressure under a private company. So not only do you lose the services, but you lose the good people and just the generalness of the quality of although it might be cheaper and you might be able to build something else with what you say, the core of the quality of the services that the government provides diminishes, and when that happens, once again, it means that the governments aren't doing their core function, they're not providing the core services, and if you're in government and you don't want to do what government is supposed to be doing, you shouldn't be there. You should just let the people who want the government to do the government things be a part of it.
Thanks, man. Done the right things, mate. Just before we go on to the next question, Lynn.
Come and sit down.
Come and take a seat, Lynn. Would you like to outline your position?
Yeah, and I can do it quite quickly. I think, you know, I agree. We need a strong public service sector. And it would be nice if the Labour Party was really clear about that, to say that we really do need a strong public service. The Greens get that, you know. And when I worked for the WA Council of Social Services,
Come and have a chair.
We'll put up a chair.
Hey, take a seat, mate. Take a seat. Yeah? We'll just ask to stay on the floor.
I hope he gets the next question.
We'll get your turn.
So when I worked for the WA Council of Social Services, and the Labour Party was in power, right? And we were struggling to keep a workforce that would help people in need. And not-for-profit organizations are really good at dealing with human services, and they deserve to be well paid. So when the Barnett government came in and gave them that $600 million, which was a requirement because we had won a legal case, and we were required to pay not-for-profit services the same as, for example, the government people in human services. So that was a great thing. You know, that was one of the good things that the Barnett government did when it got into power. But what we're mixing here is the idea between not-for-profit services and privatization of services. Because what we're talking about, I think, that we don't want to have happen is a privatized service in our hospitals, a privatized service in our custodial officers. And my job as in the Petitions Committee, one of the things that we looked at was the death of Mr. Ward. And the fact that it was a privatized service, custodial service, G4S, who came in and didn't have the same standards of employment, training,